Space, the final frontier, where no one can hear you scream, where we get mushrooms from, I assume, and where Werner Herzog will no doubt return one day. But what do we know about space? Hello, and welcome to another Good Eggs and Bad Eggs, a title I have never felt the need to rethink. It's a series where I look at a theme, trope, or idea that exists across a bunch of media examples and compare examples where they're done well with examples where they're not. That's why eggs only has one G in it, it's short for examples. A good title is not something you have to explain. Today, I'm taking a look at horror franchises that decide, hey, you know what? Let's go to space. Specifically, I mean installments of a horror series where the series began on Earth with earthly concerns and then they decided to go up space for one movie. These are different to horror movies or franchises set in space from the beginning, so none of the Alien movies are going to make an appearance. I considered doing Predators and the Cloverfield Paradox since they sort of fit, but even though they start on Earth, they're about space monsters from the beginning, so it just makes more sense for them to go up space. I'm specifically looking at series that begin on Earth, make a few installments, and then decide, hey, you know what this franchise needs? Space. Extra points if they never do it again. Also, I didn't do Critters 4 because I didn't get time. Space has been corrupted by capitalism, and I'm taking the fuck off. To really dive deep into what makes these movies what they are, I'll be asking some very important questions. First, did it need to be in space? That is to say, is space a necessary location, or would the future have sufficed? Every movie I'm going to look at uses space as kind of a shorthand for the future, and some of them didn't need to go up space. Question 2. Are the effects on par with an average episode of Red Dwarf? Red Dwarf is a long-running BBC sci-fi comedy that had an average budget of like $4 per episode. That said, it did some neat shit with all 4 of those dollars. I don't think it's fair to judge the effects in these films based on other contemporary films, but I want to see that they're doing whatever they can with what they have. Question 3. Is it a good sequel in the series? Remember, these aren't just space horrors, they're part of a series. Despite their space setting, do the iconic characters flow logically from previous depictions to what's happening here? Are the themes and concerns of the series consistent? Does taking this character to space do something neat with them, or should this have been a non-franchise movie? Question 4. Is this just aliens? Part of the fun of setting your movie in space is that you could, theoretically, make aliens. But you can't make aliens, because James Cameron already made Aliens in 1986. Nevertheless, some movies are just aliens. Finally, did I have a good time? Did the images on screen inspire happiness or even delight in me? Did I have a sensible chuckle when appropriate? Could I have had a roughly equivalent time doing anything else on Earth? Did seeing it improve my evening? I know I'm just one person, but this is my video on my channel, so I get to talk about my feelings. Also, I have a film degree with honours, and I'm a third of the way through a PhD, so my opinion is objectively correct. Subjectivity be damned, I am the arbiter of taste and will be respected as such. I'm something of an insufferable snob when it comes to coffee, but sometimes I'll find myself at Starbucks. Maybe it's a public holiday, or it's the first couple of weeks of the year and most things are still closed, or I'm in America, but god damn it, I just need some caffeine and the best I can do is Starbucks. In these trying times, I have to do some mental gymnastics where I say to myself, I'm not drinking coffee, I'm drinking Starbucks liquid. And then I drink my Starbucks liquid and I get on with my day. I think this might be the secret to watching any Hellraiser movie after the first 2. This isn't a Hellraiser movie, this is a movie where a hapless protagonist is pursued by a freaky goth torture demon. As soon as I saw directed by Alan Smithee in the opening credits, I knew that Hellraiser Bloodline would be an experience. For those who don't know, if a director wants to remove their name from a project and can sufficiently prove that they have not had enough creative control, then the director credit goes to Alan Smithee. The pseudonym was officially retired in 2000, and these days pseudonyms are selected on a case-by-case basis. Point is, if you see the name Alan Smithee in the opening credits, you are in for a time. That said, although I can understand why this got Alan Smithied, horror fans are not people you want to embarrass yourself in front of, and this absolutely reeks of studio interference, it's actually kind of good? So yeah, did I have a good time? Yes I did, there's that question out of the way. Hellraiser Bloodline has a really compelling premise and they execute it pretty well, and I think with maybe just like an extra 20 minutes of runtime it could have been explored properly. It's rare that I think movies should be longer, so savor this moment I guess. The plot begins in the distant future where an engineer, Dr. Paul Merchant, is in space solving the Lament configuration, and he's stopped by some people who've seen the first 3 movies and they know that you should not do that. To explain why he's solving the Lament configuration, he needs to first tell the story of his ancestor, a toy maker in 18th century France who was commissioned to make the lament configuration by an absolute freak and is offsider. And no, your eyes do not deceive you, that is Adam Scott. Anyway, the lament configuration does what it does, and then the timeline skips to the 90s, where the architect who designed the building from Hellraiser 3 is being pursued by interdimensional sex creatures who want to do freaky interdimensional sex at him. Pinhead kidnaps a kid. Doug Bradley does an absolutely incredible job, as always.
For God's sake, do I look like someone who cares what God thinks?
Anyway, that story concludes and it's the future again, and Paul Merchant explains that he's figured out a plan to trap Pinhead. Antics ensue. The idea of a family being pursued by a demon until a descendant figures out how to trap it is fascinating. And it's also not aliens. Well done on not being aliens. But that of course brings me to whether or not it's a good Hellraiser sequel, and nah. As I alluded to earlier, this is the Starbucks liquid of the Hellraiser series. Definitely takes a step closer to the first two movies than Hellraiser 3 did, but it doesn't get all the way there. It makes perfect sense for Pinhead to end up in space, and there's a lot of imagery that only works because it's a Hellraiser movie, but still, there's just something missing. See, the posters for Hellraiser 1 and 2 are delightfully misleading. You have this big picture of Pinhead and the word Hellraiser, implying that he's the villain, he's the raiser of hell. But in fact, Pinhead is neither of those things. Frank is the villain. Frank is the Hellraiser. Pinhead is just a consequence of Frank's monomaniacal hedonism and Julia's repression. Pinhead is the hell-raised. Pinhead might be a manifestation of evil, but the evil that takes place is the ordinary humankind. Compare that to 3 onwards, where Pinhead just kind of chooses a target and pursues them because fuck them, I guess. I can see why they do that. Pinhead is incredibly compelling as a character, and Doug Bradley is absolutely terrific in that role, but making him the villain takes the series away from what made it compelling. It's a huge thematic departure. Were the effects on par with an episode of Red Dwarf? Yep. They're not the best, but the filmmakers knew what to do practically, what to do digitally, and what they could achieve on their budget. And hey, you know what? I'm going to take this one step further. This is an episode of Red Dwarf.
What's your name?
Rimmer.
This lady is not just named Rimmer, she is Ace Rimmer. This whole plot takes place in one of the Ace Rimmer universes. For this joke to make sense, you have to know that there was a running gag in Red Dwarf where in basically every universe except the one the show is set in, the uptight, neurotic, by-the-book character is instead this boy's own adventure character named Ace Rimmer. Anyway, I don't know how much I trust the Red Dwarf series to handle a trans plotline, so instead, in this universe, a well-timed knock at the door meant that she was conceived instead of the Rimmer we're used to, but in every other possible way, she is Arnold Judas Rimmer. Actually, this solves the whole series. Every Hellraiser movie from 3 onward is an Ace Rimmer adventure. And finally, did it need to be in space? Yeah. I was ready to say no until the final reveal, which I won't spoil here just in case you do want to go in cold, but it's actually a really cool reveal and 100% justifies being in space. Oh boy, the early 2000s sure was something. Jason X was released in 2002, but it was made in 2000, which was simultaneously the ancient past and distant future. The bright colours of the 90s were fading into the metallics of the 2000s. We hadn't figured out what music would be, what movies would be, what anything would be, and Jason X was plopped right in there. At this point you've probably realised that this footage is not in fact from Jason X, but from the film clip to the Nikki Webster song Strawberry Kisses. Jason X probably should not have been made, but it is critically important that it was. Important to the Friday the 13th series, important to science fiction, important to the cultural landscape. So much rests on this bizarre fever dream that no single review could possibly do justice to either how good or how bad it is. Jason X has a plot that is thoroughly ridiculous and completely reasonable compared to some of the franchise's other installments. Jason Voorhees has been found guilty of all the murders he did, but no matter what they try, the government is just not able to execute him. So instead they keep him contained, but then a guy who is inexplicably played by David Cronenberg wants to study Jason and make super soldiers out of them, despite how bad an idea that is. But they don't get the chance because Jason escapes and murderizes a few people, and then final girl Rowan manages to cryogenically freeze him, but accidentally freezes herself in the process. 400-ish years later, a crew of students discover the bodies, revive Rowan, and declare that Jason is too dead to be revived. But of course he's not. Of course he's not.
Guys! It's okay, he just wanted his machete back!
Hey dude, what did he want his machete for? Is there dense vegetation on this spaceship? think before you say each word. Anyway, here's my unifying theory of every Friday the 13th movie. Jason has a rare disease that causes him to release pheromones into the air, making everyone around him inexplicably and insatiably down to clown. However, when he gets a whiff of the pheromones that roll off other people in response, he becomes murderously angry due to dysregulation of the amygdala. This disease is passed on matrilineally, so Pamela had it too. Does any of that make medical sense? Well, let me answer your question with another question. Did you notice that when I said amygdala, the diagram I used actually highlighted the hippocampus? My point is, just like any fan theory, you may take it or leave it. This movie is the reason I'm asking, is this just aliens? Because oh boy is it aliens. David Cronenberg and a second guy both want to make money off the extremely dangerous being that is Jason Voorhees. We've got a lady who's been perfectly preserved and understands the danger better than the future people. Also, this movie kind of perfectly predicted how you just expected to be available to work 100% of the time because, like, this guy video calls his boss who seems to have his camera phone thing installed in the ceiling directly above his bed. Of course, this movie is not aliens, it's Jason X, so any anti-capitalist themes that might have arisen are dropped almost immediately. Also, it's not content with just being aliens, it also wants to be Predator and The Matrix. That said, despite being aliens, I don't think this movie needed to be in space. I know that's a weird thing to say about a movie where the only thing people know about it is that it's the one where Jason goes up space. And it's perfectly fine that they went up space, but the plot would have been basically the same on a transporter between biomes of a desolate and uninhabitable Earth. The only thing they would have had to change is that instead of launching him out of an airlock and burning him up in the atmosphere of Earth 2, they would have had to do a different thing. But what do you remember about Jason X? Was it the ending, or was it Jason getting wrecked by a sex robot and then being rebuilt as Uber Jason? Yes, I know that KM14 is a science robot, but out of the characters, the director, and me, I might be the only one who knows that.
Oh, wow. Gave her an upload.
Having your movie set in a cold vacuum of space means that, for example, you're constantly at risk of depressurizing, especially when you're being pursued by a guy who has already demonstrated that he can stab through about a foot of solid metal. But there's just none of that here. Again, it's fine that it's in space, I'm glad that it's in space, but they didn't do a whole lot with that setting, except to use it as a shorthand for the future. As for the effects, what Red Dwarf had in its favour is that it made creative use of its budget and did interesting things to cover the holes in it. Jason X, on the other hand, just kinda hopes you don't notice the dodgy CG. And yes, I know that this scene is supposed to be in a simulation, but that's revealed after the CGI money shot that is underwhelming even for the turn of the century. Also, this final shot could have been done practically, and it's baffling to me that they didn't. It would have been a lot cheaper to just use wires to guide a mask to where they needed it to be and then remove the wires digitally. That technology had basically been perfected thanks to, I'm not kidding, Howard the Duck. That said, is this a good sequel? Yes. This was made after New Line bought the rights to Jason Voorhees the character, but not the name Friday the 13th. It's the 10th movie in a series that routinely goes off the rails, and it's the one that goes up space. All those should be points against it, but no. This is very much a Friday the 13th movie. The Friday the 13th series established itself as one with a loosey-goosey approach to continuity when in the 5 years between parts 1 and 2, Jason went from being a dead child to being a large adult man. Before sending him to space, the series had already sent him to Hell and to Manhattan, and I'd say that the step from the bottom of Crystal Lake to either Hell or Manhattan is just as large a step as the one from Manhattan to space in this continuity. Also, Kane Hodder plays Jason, and he's generally regarded as the most well-known, if not the best Jason, despite not making his first appearance until part 7. None of this is intended as a statement on the quality of the Friday the 13th series, or on any individual installment, especially your favourite. Just to say that the only consistent thing in this series is its inconsistency. Genuinely, the thing that endears this series to me is the fact that continuity is a begrudging afterthought. And finally, did I have a good time? Yeah, I guess. I don't regret watching it. I had a sensible chuckle occasionally.
Are you paying attention, Azrael?
Yeah.
Well, don't touch anything.
Some parts were positively delightful. Sometimes this movie absolutely knows what it's about, like this bit that's a bit too gory to show in detail, but a guy is impaled on a drill and then he just slowly spins down it. There's a scene that should be really intense, and on paper it's a great scene, where the civilian researchers are listening on the comms as the Marines who are supposed to be protecting them are killed one by one. but in practice you're kind of just waiting for everyone to hurry up and get murderized so that you can do the rest of the movie. There are also some bits I've heard about as though they're extremely good additions to the movie, but they just didn't land for me. I guess your mileage may vary when it comes to the simulator sequence.
Or we can have premarital sex.
I feel like this should have been funnier than it was to, like, have this set up, cut to something else, and then cut to Jason beating one camper to death with the other camper. Like, on paper, that's hilarious, but it just didn't work. And I was absolutely on this movie's level by this point, so there's no reason why this shouldn't have worked, except it didn't. I guess I just liked it less than Hellraiser 4 is what I'm saying. I cannot believe that the Leprechaun series went to space before it went to the hood. Or went back to the hood. I cannot believe this movie exists at all. Obviously, I have no way of proving this, but I'm certain that the way this movie was written is that someone wrote on a sticky note chestburster but out of a guy's dick, and then a team of people pitched scenes that they could put around that. It's possible to cast doubt on this hypothesis by checking the film's IMDb entry and noticing that only one person is listed as a writer, 2 if you count the based on a character by credit, but I watched this whole movie, and I will not be convinced that it was made any other way. That said, for a movie that was absolutely just a series of scenes to place around chestburster but out of a guy's dick, it was a surprisingly good time. Not like a good movie, but better than it had any reason to be. The plot follows a team of grunts working for the textbook definition of a mad scientist as they go to a planet and do grunts on a planet things. Unfortunately, on this planet, the leprechaun is busy seducing an alien princess for, like, power or something. And when the grunts kill him and one of them pees on the body, the leprechaun's, like, energy or life force or something can enter the guy, and then they do the chestburster out of his dick thing. And it all kind of follows logically from there, for a given value of logically. And honestly, that's fine. I'm surprised by how well this movie is aged. The effects are exactly on par with an equivalent episode of Red Dwarf, so well done there. There are definitely some sleazy bits, like for example, that princess from earlier is of a species that is basically just humans but glittery, and if a female of the species shows you her breasts, you're definitely going to die. And like, that's explained after an absolutely baffling scene where she's being all high and mighty and has her top open for like what seems like no reason, but then someone explains, oh, actually it's bad that that happened because basically she's promised she's gonna have you killed, and everyone present is like, I do not care at all because girl alien have titties. Also, the mad scientist, spoilers for a movie you're probably not going to watch, turns into a giant scorpion monster and menaces Dr. Lady Scientist, and doesn't hurt her at all, but does remove her pants, which are not replaced. Also, there's a pretty gross gay panic bit that I'm not going to show you here, but a character basically has his mind taken over and he's forced to perform a drag act. Not to mention, this is an image of a real folkloric figure from a real country that very much exists, and it's probably offensive. And oh my god, the depiction of disability is just painfully 90s. Alright, so now that I've gone through an itemized list of all the things wrong with this movie, it's pretty good. like what the hell? Like, it's a good movie to get your friends together to watch, assuming that's safe, what with the ongoing plague. Aside from the 2 bits I've already brought up, it's remarkably unsleazy. Like, one guy tries to sleaze on an unconscious woman, and his boss immediately puts a stop to it. And like, look at the scene composition! Thought went into this. This is funny! The grunts are believably written, if a bit over-the-top macho. The dynamics between the characters is quite well written. The world-building works well, and clearly more thought was put into it than is deserved by Leprechaun in Space. There's tension between Dr. Lady Scientist and the Marines, but it always seems to come from a believable character motivation rather than being something that they just added for the sake of giving the movie tension. And despite his character being a ridiculous caricature, Warwick Davis does a great job and seems to be having a terrific time. It seems weird to say that he has a deep understanding of the character he's developed, considering the character, but he's really putting a lot of effort into a performance that does not warrant it. So yeah, this works as a sequel to the first 3 Leprechaun movies. Also, at one point, the Leprechaun is blasted with a size-changing ray and is made huge. And hey, this movie makes good use of the space setting. Not just because they're going to other planets and meeting aliens and what have you, but the fact that they're in space and at constant risk of depressurizing or running out of fuel or the life support being fucked with or losing communication is something that the movie actually does something with. And it makes perfect sense that a creature like the Leprechaun would end up in space. For a movie whose whole concept is what if Leprechaun went up space, and whose whole purpose for existing is what if chestburster but out of a guy's dick, genuine thought and effort was put into making it work. As for whether or not this is just aliens, Yeah, there's enough aliens in here to make it aliens. There are space marines dealing with something more dangerous than they're prepared for, there's a corporation valuing a dangerous asset over human life, and I mentioned the chest burster out of a guy's dick thing, yeah, I brought that up. That said, there's also enough that's solidly not aliens to not just be aliens. I'm gonna say this is a half aliens. It's not aliens, but it's not aliens. And finally, did I have a good time? Inexplicably, yes. This was a good time. Not an amazing movie, and I don't even know if I recommend watching it, but I had a good time, and I'm glad I watched it. My partner watched it with me and also had a good time, so we can rule out my brain being sanded smooth by too many bad movies, but we still shouldn't rule out us having the lockdown sillies or perhaps a gas leak. Anyway, here are some pitches for other horror franchises that I think should go up space. I Know What You Did Last Summer, in space! Basically the same plot, but instead of hitting someone with a car, it's launching someone out of an airlock. Halloween, Season of the Space Witch. So the third Halloween movie, the one that wasn't about Michael Myers, we retcon it so that the energy from the TV broadcast launched Myers into space, where he's been frozen and orbiting the Earth. 500 years into the future, the Earth is uninhabitable and Myers crashes into an orbiting habitation station where people nurse him back to health, but it's not like future tech smart doctors, it's basically the cult from the Thorn trilogy, but in space! In space, nobody can hear you scream. Sidney Prescott attempts to get away from the whole Ghostface thing by volunteering to be part of the first group colonizing Mars, guessing correctly that a bunch of astrophysicists have more important things to do than recreate pop culture. Unfortunately, the expedition's financier, who is a wholly fictional character and any resemblance to Elon Musk is purely coincidental, thinks it would be hilarious if there was a Ghostface up there with them. Maybe pays someone and that person has like a really tenuous connection, like their cousin went to Sydney's high school a few years after her. Basically, it's all about how tech bros make everything worse. Dracula! In space! Do I even need to explain this one? Dracula goes to space, who cares how? Alright, here's some other franchises I think would benefit from the space treatment. Thanks so much for experiencing space with me. In the comments, let me know what your favourite incongruous space sequel was and why it was the 9th Fast and the Furious movie. If you want to support what I do, you can do the usual YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe. You've been to this website, you know what's up. I also have a Patreon where you can support me and join the names in my very short credits. For now, that's it from me. Stay safe and say hi to your pets for me.